In progress.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the third and final day of our kick-off ceremony and roundtable series for the NWO Imagining Modernity project. I'm Riswarie, and I will continue to be your master of ceremony today. Over the past 2 days, we have heard insightful keynote addresses and engaged in stimulating roundtable discussions on knowledge gap existence and scientific and political motives. Today, we will complete our series with 2 more roundtable sessions. This morning's roundtable will focus on the influence of Dutch colonial policies on the relocation of cultural objects and the development of curriculum at institutions like ITB. And in the afternoon, we will examine contemporary issues in heritage conservation, exploring current challenges and opportunities in preserving and reimagining our cultural heritage. It is now my pleasure to introduce our third roundtable session on the influence of Dutch colonial policies. This session will explore how Dutch colonial policies influence the relocation of cultural objects and development of curriculum at institutions like ITB. I am pleased to introduce our convener for this session, Dr. Kiki Rizky Sutisna Putri from Center for Indonesian Visual Art Studies, Faculty of Art and Design, ITB. She will guide our discussion with our distinguished panelists. The floor is yours.
Oh, yeah, thank you, Ari. Welcome again, everyone. Thank you for being so patient and lovely for these past 3 days. This is our last days, but we have 2 roundtables for today. So I will be not alone chairing this roundtable. I have co-chairs here with us, Dr. Harifah Siregar. Hello. And also we have Aulia Yeru. Aulia Yeru unfortunately feel unwell this past 2 days, so get well soon. Will be here with us online from his house in Bandung. Aulia is a PhD candidate in UNSW Australia. And we have also Rahadiningtyas chairing for today's roundtables. And yeah, our third roundtable, the theme is the influence of Dutch colonial policies. The problem analysis assumes that Dutch colonial policies had a substantial influence on the relocation of the object, of the arches, and how the relocation of the object also, or has been, or maybe not, I don't know, shaping the curriculum at ITB. So the question is that, to what extent did the Dutch colonial policies influence the development of the curriculum at ITB? And how did local actors, means also the scholars in ITB, contribute to shaping the curriculum itself? And what role did the objects, the archa, play in this context? So we invited 3 speakers. It actually started to be 4. It was 4, but one of them, Ibu Retno, couldn't join us today because it's due to her role as head of Balai Pelestarian Kebudayaan now. So she's now in her dinas, so she couldn't join us for today. We have Anissa Rahadiningtyas here today with us. Hi, Icha. Hello. Anissa Rahadiningtyas is an art historian who earned her PhD in art history for Cornell University. Her dissertation explores the position of Islamic religiosity, ritual, and performance in Indonesian modern and contemporary art. She is now currently Assistant Curator of Islamic Aesthetics in Modern and Contemporary Southeast Asia in National Gallery, Singapore. And we have also here Mohammad Nanda Widyarta. Pak Nanda pursued architecture at the University of Oklahoma in Norman, USA, and earned his postgraduate degree from Architecture Association School of Architecture, AA in London. He is now finishing his PhD program at the University of New South Wales. His research primarily explores the architectural histories of 20th century Indonesia and surrounding regions. He has researched cities including Jakarta, Bogor, Bandung, and Copenhagen. Halo Pak Nanda, selamat pagi.
Pagi.
And for the third speaker for this morning, we have Pak Dikdik Sayahdikumullah, PhD. Pak Dikdik is a lecturer at the Visual Art Expertise Group atau kelompok keahlian seni rupa in Faculty of Art and Design, Institut Teknologi Bandung. He is now teaching and also do some research intersecting including contemporary drawing, visual storytelling, and interdisciplinary artistic methods. Pak Dikdik, could you join me here? I will be chairing this morning session to cheering you up because you are the only offline speaker for today, but it's okay, no problem. So we have some rules, same as yesterday rules, that we will start with 2 speakers. We will start with Anissa and then followed by Pak Nanda. And then after 2 speakers, we will open 1 or 2 specific and very short questions. And after that, followed by the third speaker, Pak Dikdik. And then after all speaker has sharing their knowledge, we will wrap up and open for discussion. Begitu. So one of speaker have around 15 minutes of presentation each. Begitu Pak Awul dan Pak Pai. Yeah. Okay. For this first speaker, I will. Yeah. Ica, do you? Yeah. Already. Yeah. So. The
can everyone hear me?
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me fine? Can everyone hear me? Okay. All right. So I would assume that everyone can hear me okay. Thank you, Ibu Kiki, for introducing me and for the invitation to join the roundtable discussion and workshop in general. So as introduced by Kiki, the curator, so I got promoted actually, so this great news. So I'm a curator of Islamic Aesthetics now in Modern and Contemporary Southeast Asia at National Gallery, Singapore. And I wish I could be there in Bandung, but unfortunately I can't. So, um, so I know that the topic is about colonial legacies, colonial policies, and its impact on Earth. Also, for sort uh, sort of worth to talk
Uh,
about.
Icha, sorry,
I,
we cannot hear you very clear.
okay,
So can you
can you hear me now?
hold, yeah, a bit? We have to set up the audio.
Okay,
Yeah.
sounds good. I can't see anyone, which is why I can't determine whether you guys can hear me on. Okay, now it's better.
Oh yeah. Okay, let's try again. Icha, can you move your maybe speaker or your earphone closer
I don't know.
a
I'm
bit?
just using this earphone
Ah,
sort of
yeah,
pieces here.
yeah.
Okay, so is it now okay?
It's yeah, better.
It's better. Um, okay. Sorry, I'm in the office. Um, yeah, so I thought that it would be also worth to talk about colonial legacy and construction of Southeast Asian art history, because I think we're probably going to see sort of the implications, and we're going to see sort of like a parallel relationships between all of these. And I will be talking specifically, of course, with Southeast Asian art history in museums. So I'll just start since we don't have that much time. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so as you know that if we go around sort of Europe, North America, the representations of Southeast Asian art in museums are mostly going to be sort of focused on the presentations of the Hindu Buddhist objects. And this is something that we've seen and already talked about in yesterday's session. This is the display at the Volkenkunde Museum in Leiden. And if you go to the next slide, um, this is also the display at Gallery 249 at the Metropolitan Art Museum in New York. So their Southeast Asia gallery, I think, was reopened, I think, when I was in the US as well. So maybe about 10 years, more than 10 years ago, I think. And as you can see that the focus of the Southeast Asia Gallery is still very much sort of limited to the Hindu Buddhist representation. So nothing goes beyond sort of the 1600s when it comes to the objects being presented. And Chiara Formici has also written about this. So what is Southeast Asia? It is, what is Southeast Asian art objects beyond the 16th century? So um, and as you can see here, there is none basically. So Southeast Asian art history kind of stops in the 16th century when it comes to the representations at largely sort of like survey museums. So when we talk about survey museums, we talk about the Met, we talk about the Louvre, we talk about Valkenkunde. Is kind of specific because it's an ethnographic museum, a technology museum in Lake, and it's very much focused on on the ethnographic objects from around the world, particularly of previously Dutch colonies, right? So Suriname, um, Indonesia, and so forth. So then it really shows that uh, that the writing of Southeast Asian art, and therefore the imagination of Southeast Asian art, is really limited or dominated by Hindu Buddhist objects, and how it relates then to my research when it comes to Islam and Islamic art. Then Islam and Islamic art was sort of like not talked about in many of these museums or glossed over. So if we go to the Met, there's a gallery of Islamic art, but they rename it to the gallery according to the region. So the Middle East, South Asia, gallery. So in order to sort of deal with the limitations of the category of Islamic art, so even in that gallery, we don't find objects from Southeast Asia. So Southeast Asia is not being represented as sort of contributing to the development of or to be part of sort of quote unquote Islamic civilizations across the world. There's only one, I think, sort of like recent development, I think back in 2018, 2017, maybe, yeah, around that time period, the British Museum has has dedicated one part of its Southeast Asia presentation to Islamic objects. And it sort of ties to patronage because the presentation was sponsored by the Al-Bukhari Foundation or Bukhari family. And as we know, the Al-Bukhari Foundation is the one behind the establishment of the Museum of Islamic Art in Malaysia. It's a great museum if you want to come to Malaysia and sort of visit that. And so we still see this dominant representations of Southeast Asia as Hindu Buddhist, largely Hindu Buddhist, and it sort of ties to the formation of the Southeast Asian studies itself. Because in order to understand Southeast Asia, this is sort of happening during the colonization period, so in the 40s, in the 50s, along with the sort of formation of the United States and United States institutions as where area studies, including Southeast Asia studies, were formed back in the 40s and 50s. And the formation of Southeast Asian studies in the U.S. universities can be traced back also to the how Southeast Asia, and particularly Indonesia or Dutch East Indies, was sort of discussed in colonial period. So it really ties to the ways in which colonial studies on the East Indies was developed, and then sort of continued on in these area studies institutions in the United States, and Cornell was one of them. And then if we see the book by, for example, Claire Holt, you can see still the dominance of the Hindu Buddhist sort of objects or the Hindu Buddhist discussions of Indonesia and Southeast Asia. So the area studies scholars at the time, as I've said earlier, they want to sort of make sense of Southeast Asia as a unified region. Right, and I think this has been talked about in several symposiums or in many publications and in many essays, including, of course, Marika's essay as well, and in books. And to understand Southeast Asia as part of Indianized states, or or as sharing sort of similar Hindu Buddhist trajectory, particularly in pre-modern times, then helps a lot in this sort of building or constructing the idea of Southeast Asia as an area that is accessible. And this also has something to do, and if we trace it back, this has something to do with the ways, I think yesterday's speakers already talked about colonial exhibitions or colonial expos back in the early 20th century. And if we go to the next slide, All right, so if we go to the next slide, so we can see the continuation of the displays, right, of the prioritization of the displays of Hindu Buddhist objects. And of course, a lot of these objects were taken from the temples in Java, the temples. And if we sort of look at, let's say, this is the Colonial Exposition in Amsterdam in 1883. Marika has written a lot about this as well. And if we go to Colonial Expo in 1900s or 1931 in Paris, you'll see a lot of also Hindu Buddhist structures and objects being taken out of Angkor or that they built actually a replica of Angkor. And as you can see, a lot of these representations of presentations in colonial exhibitions focus on this with, I think there are some parts as well as about trade objects and then weaponry, of course, looted items, spoilers of wars from different colonial wars that happened in the late 19th, early 20th centuries, of course, including the Java War, the Padri War in Sumatra, and the Aceh War that went on until like 1905, 1906, 1907. And there is from these colonial exhibitions, there was already a certain understanding that the sort of the peak of Javanese civilization, or the peak of civilization in the Dutch East Indies, happened during this period until the fall of Majapahit, until like the 16th century, right? And there was already an understanding sort of being built that Islam was the dominant force that suffocated art in Java centuries after that. But I think, as written by Marike, that this sort of attitude that was fostered by the Dutch that this attitude was actually fostered by the Dutch colonial policy against Islam in the Netherlands Indies. And again, it was also sort of like caused by a lot of these colonial wars that the Dutch gets. The locals were led by sort of Muslim leaders or leaders with affiliations with Islam. So Prince Diponegoro is one of them. Jogjakarta is one of them. And then there was already sort of like a sentiment that a lot of these wars are the holy war, right? And because of these wars that happened in the 1800s, all the way to the 1900s, the Dutch colonial policy against Islam was then, even more sort of like solidified, right? They aim to sort of sever the connections between the sort of the arts of the colony with Islam. And I think it sort of like affects the way we talk about art history. We talk about art. We talk about art and art history. When we were in Bandung in college, and the way, of course, we talk about art history now. And I also want to show that in the next slides, because of these sort of prioritization of the Hindu-Buddhist objects, there's also the popularization of it and sort of the proliferations of the imagination of the Indies as repeats with this sort of monumental objects. And one of the sort of objects that contribute to this is this proliferation of this album by Isidore van Kinsbergen. So back in the 1873, 1874. So this is photographs of reliefs and temples of Borobudur. And this helps to sort of form and solidify the imaginations of the Indies back in the Netherlands. That these temples are the organic part of the landscape that is there, And sorry, and it fuels the Dutch fascinations of the Hindu-Javanese art in the Netherlands. And we also know that since the 19th century, Orientalism also swept across Europe and the Netherlands. And the Dutch also embarked on the mission to uncover sort of Java's authentic more authentic past. So the present sort of like landscape of Java, where where the populations were already mostly Muslims, in the 19th century. A lot of the colonial officers, scholars, they don't consider it as authentic, as authentic Indies. So Islam was always considered as superficial, and therefore, is not part of the culture. And so we also know the Raffles also wrote a book about the history of Java. It was published in London in 1817, and his quote-unquote discovery of Tampa in 1814 provoked the Dutch to continue their pioneering surveying project of Javanese antiquities. And I think in the sort of the latter half of the 19th century, then we'll see more Dutch scholars undertook numerous expeditions and archaeological research on temples and structures. And if you look at the sort of publications, essays at the BKI or the Ardhana involvement in the Van Nederlands Indies, the journal that has been that still is around until today. And if we look at the journal articles from the period after 1870s, right, until at least the 1960s, the majority of articles written are about Javanese antiquities or ancient, not ancient, or like pre-Islamic heritage. There is a small percentage of articles concerning other arts, also still associated with Javanese arts. So batik, burial monuments, Javanese crests, and daggers, and so forth. So I think this also, builds the fantasy of Java as unchanging place, even all the way to the modern period, all the way to the decolonization period. It's still replete with Hindu Buddhist temples, sort of like sprinkled across like the terrain, and and then there's also a lot of paintings being produced. So if we go to the next slides, we are probably familiar with the name Antoine Payan, the Borobudur from 1835. And this painting sort of adds the repertoire of paintings and prints of the Hindu Buddhist architectural monuments in Java by colonial drafters and painters. Alongside him, we know someone like Hubertus Sibot and also Janus Theodorus Beck, right? And they've been producing a lot of paintings about the Hindu Buddhist monuments. And if you can see here, the Borobudur standing tall, in the middle, and you see sort of a large Buddha statue and a group of people sort of like around it. And it looks like they were conducting kind of ritual and really making merit to the Buddha. And this scene sort of shows, that there is a continued relevance of Buddhism or Hindu Buddhism in the lives of ordinary people. And therefore sort of like negates the presence, sort of like, or sort of like puts the sort of realities of the people in Java being Muslims in the 19th century in the back of like in the backs of people's imaginations. I mean, like it's not there anymore. It's being like sort of like transplanted by these kind of representations, very much. So I think Suzy Trotsky sort of wrote that the eternal pure Hindu Buddhist elements that they're portrayed in landscape paintings, and we also see this sort of paintings being produced by Rahadiningtyas later. So the Hindu Buddhist elements portrayed in this landscape painting as organic to the Indies, and they served, quote unquote, as like an antidote to colonial anxieties about Islam. And this sort of imagination sort of like structure of how we present our art history still continues in the way even modern art museums sort of like uh, arrange their exhibition. So I'm looking at the sort of permanent display here at the National Gallery. So if we go to the other slide. Yeah, so this is the inaugural presentations of the National Gallery of Singapore. You see a lot of dots there because this is sort of like a, what do you call it? This is based on an archival photos of the virtual tour that people can also try to access in National Gallery's website. So you can actually see the permanent galleries display online. As you can see, if you see the sort of like the gray walls and the cabinets, and this is the first gallery in the inaugural times, and the first gallery was sort of like dedicated to the moment in the 19th century. This is the formation of knowledge and the formation of colonial, solidification of colonial modernity as well. This is when a lot of research, a lot of scholarly research, let's say by the Royal Batavian Societies, for example, was done. I think the previous speaker from yesterday also talked about it. You see also the establishment of museums, the establishments of the establishment of museums across Southeast Asia, in Cambodia, in Indonesia, and so forth. And if we go to the next slide.
Sorry, we have 1 minute to go.
1 minute, okay. We go to the next slide. Yeah, so this one. Then we'll see, again, this is the photographs of the Hindu Buddhist temples. And we can see the photographs by Asil Sapas, which is a local photographer. And on the right side is a photograph engraving by the Stelapo of Angkor. So I think it was Marito who argues about, why then this project of documenting Hindu Buddhist monuments was so important for the Dutch at the time, because they were also in competition with other colonial forces like France, like the Britain, and it sort of tied into the late formation of colonial states. Yeah, and I think from here, I'm going to end here, and I think from here we can then talk about how it sort of impacts our curriculum at ITB. And I think in our curriculum we still learn about Seni Rupa Lama, Indonesian art, and Seni Rupa Baku Indonesia. And we start very early on, and then we go on to the Hindu Buddhist period and then the Islamic period. And then I think we can talk about it in the roundtable or more discussion. I think we can.
Okay, yeah. Can you continue to this one?
Oh, should I continue to this?
It's already there.
Okay, sure. Yeah, this is the painting by Rahadiningtyas, and it was actually a commission. It was a commission by a Scottish trader at the time in Java, and this was done in 1860. So he was commissioned to produce landscapes of Java. There are 4 paintings, and now they are all in the collection of the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C. We didn't know that it was there until the National Gallery curators during the inaugural presentation found it and then displayed it here. So we can also see, sort of like a similar ways, like Payan, the way Payan sort of like depict the temple, right? That it's part of the organic landscape of the Indies, and you can still see it here, basically.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Icha. that's our first speaker for today, for this session. So yeah, this Western imagination, we thought that it is also related to how our cultural history is presented in mostly museum, and also the question is still there. So what kind of imagination and what kind of the policies being related to that imagination could be, yeah, that could be, could be our next following question. Yeah. So before question, we will follow with Pak Nanda's presentation. Halo Pak Nanda, sudah siap?
Yep, siap.
Oke, terima kasih Pak. Silakan Pak.
Okay, thank you for inviting me to this forum. First of all, I'm happy to be here, humbled to be here actually, and I'm sorry for not being able to be present physically, but what can I do? There are things that I have that I couldn't live anyway. However, what I'm going to present today is not something that is directly related to the presence of the Hindu-Buddhist statues at ITB campus. Nevertheless, I hope what I present today can shed some more lights on the context surrounding their presence. Although of course, as architecture is my field, so I will take it from architectural angle. So anyway, as far as I could gather, architectural discourse in Indonesia up to today is characterized. I'm not saying that everything about architectural discourse in Indonesia is about this topic, of course. However, this subject has been quite significant in architectural discourse in Indonesia for, I would say, the last 100 years. The character that I'm talking about is the binary way of seeing things: past versus present, traditional versus contemporary, local versus global, and the likes. What I argue here is that what happened during the colonial era, and it had to do, of course, with the Dutch colonial policy, is a significant factor for this phenomenon on how we look at our own architecture up until this very moment. Next slide, please. And by the way, this is the reason why we have the Istiqlal Mosque, for instance, being constructed out of reinforced concrete. Why reinforced concrete? Why Sukarno didn't want wood and all that? But anyway, Istiqlal is not really the subject of today's presentation. So, as you know, and as has been mentioned and discussed in by other presenters for the last 2 days, 3 days, in fact, in the 1870s up to 1942, actually, there was the intrusion of Western capital into Indonesia. After liberalization of plantation in the 1870s. Invitation for private investors and all that. And it did have effect, of course, on architectural development in what is now Indonesia, because more investment means urban development as an effect. Okay, I don't really want to talk about it in detail, but I'm kind of jumpy here. So urban development required professional architects. So beginning in the very early decade of the 20th century, professional architects, what I mean by professional architects are people who were trained at architecture schools, came to what is now Indonesia. And we started to see, for instance, around 1905, if I'm not mistaken, one Dutch architect practicing in what is now Jakarta, Moyen, criticized neoclassical architecture in Indonesia because, he said it's not really appropriate for the colony. And then, as you know, of course, what is now ITB, the Technische Hogeschool te Bandung, was inaugurated in 1920, and this was followed like a few years after that, followed by an architectural debate between Henri Mecklenpont and Charles Proper Wolf Schumacher. And this debate actually still has impact on architectural discourse in Indonesia up to today. And not only that, in 1922 and 23, I think who mentioned about it? Was it Pak Martono or Bu Indah yesterday? That Hendrik Terus Berlage, a very influential architect in not only in the Netherlands but also in Europe at that time, came to Indonesia. Well, he didn't come to Indonesia to join the debate, of course. He had another reason. But upon encountering the debate between Mecklenpont and Schumacher, Berlage expressed his support for Mecklenpont's position. Well, of course, there is a reason there. So that's, and then of course, there are all this happen in a very, very important context. What I think is very important context. It consisted of foreign capital in Indonesia that I mentioned earlier, whether it's Dutch, British, American, etc. And then something that has been mentioned and discussed throughout these roundtable sessions since, including yesterday, for instance, the ethical policy, right? Now, the ethical policy had to do, had to do with an effort of social engineering to create in the society through the union of East and West. Now, think about a book by Arnold Dear Adrian Dekat Angelino, the colonial, which laid out the policy of the colonial government in Indonesia. It clearly talks about this social engineering as a way to create what he called in this society. That may be the basis for today's Indonesian society. Okay, next slide, please. So in order to make it possible for us to, not for us, I'm sorry, for the colonial government to understand its colonial subject, of course, as you all know, and it has been discussed, there was a necessity to produce knowledge, all right? Produce knowledge about the colonial subject, of course. This is just one example how a person who never studied architecture, as far as I know, Sunukur Gronya, tried to comprehend the Aceh by studying an architectural piece of Aceh, this house. Well, of course, we can discuss why the house of the elite that he selected as a study object, instead of the house of ordinary people of Aceh. That's another debate, another discussion. But architecture as artifacts is an object that can be used to study the people, as you know, and that is the reason why we saw a lot of similar studies throughout the colonial era. And this also shape the way we up to today study our architecture, unfortunately. Well, I think that's still influential in the way we study architecture of our own at this moment. Next slide, please. Well, I mentioned that what is now ITB was established in 1920. Actually, the West Hall, designed by the architect Henri Mecklenpont, was designed in 1919, of course. I mean, yeah, well, it took time to design and build. And as you know, it had to do with ethical policy, certainly. Ethical policy was related to political and economic agendas of the colonial regime. Notice that the establishment of higher learning centers in the colony, at least up to certain period within the late colonial era, was limited to engineering. That's why ITB, law, and medicine. That includes my own institution. Now, notice that philosophy, sociology, economics, and the likes were not really offered in the colony. I mean, if an Indonesian wanted to study economy like Mohammad Hatta did, this person had to go to Europe. Why is that? Well, to limit the number of natives who study these fields, because those fields were probably seen as potentially subversive, right? Uh, um, you know how it's dangerous for somebody. Look at Muhammad Hatta, for instance. He always argue against colonialism by using economic calculations. Imagine if somebody studied philosophy and say something nasty about the colonial government. So engineering, law, and medicine were seen as not only quote unquote safe, but also necessary uh, as a part to create an appropriate condition for the economic endeavor of the colonial government. Well, all of this set a context within which architectural debate between McLean-Pont, who supported what he called as Indies architecture, which may be translated today as Indonesian architecture or whatever it is, and between McLean-Pont and Schumacher, who supported modernist architecture. Okay, I may be being simplistic here, but that's, approximately that's how it is. The specter of this colonial era debate, architectural debate, still haunts architectural debates of today in Indonesia. Um, it seems to me, at least to me, up to now, after around a century, not many architects in Indonesia have managed to distance themselves from such a blueprint of architectural debate. Because in my opinion, or this is my personal opinion, it is better for architects to spend time and energy for a debate on how architecture solves a real problem on the field rather than debating on how we create, I don't know, the architecture of identity based on whatever political imagination that may only represent certain segments of the society anyway. Okay, next slide, please. So the colonial policy of the already said social engineering attempt and the ethical policy prompted by intrusion of foreign capital into the colony, I believe set up a big drop for Vincent Rogers van Romont, who indeed has to be credited for the conservation of ancient temples, such as Prambanan and all that. I think Bu Anissa already very well in her excellent presentation explained one context within which Hindu, Buddhist, Javanese, I have to underline that, ruins history to be selected as the classical thing rather than anything else. Selection is always political. So Van Romon's experience of conservation of these temples, I'm sure, had impact on architectural program at ITB. Just if you like, go to architecture department at ITB, find the glass plates that Van Romon actually used in his lectures, in his classrooms. Just count the number of glass plates showing classical Javanese temples or Hindu Buddhist Javanese temples that in Van Romon's collection. There are a lot of them. Now that actually, the number itself suggests the significant value of these candis, at least for Van Roman, and imagine the impact on the students. Okay, next slides, please. Yes, we all know that in 1954, during his inauguration as a professor, Van Roman called for the search for Indonesian architecture, which, if I recall it correctly, when I'm trying to recall what I read I read his speech once. If I can recall it correctly, he said that what he called as Indonesian architecture could only be derived from the condition of the Indonesian society. Sounds good. We can agree with that. In fact, this thought seems to be not only logical, but in a way, it resonates with Sujatmoko's, Sujatmoko, the historian, Sujatmoko's proposal for Indonesian historiography that was to be based on the reality of the society. But we do need to scrutinize Van Roman's attitude toward Java's Hindu-Buddhist period. I think that's what Bu Anissa actually did in her presentation. Surely his experience, Van Roman's experience of conserving the candis affected him personally. Yet his conservation projects needs to be set against another backdrop, Indonesian historiography according to colonial narrative. What I call as colonial narrative here with is, of course, multifaceted. It needs to be further discussed and scrutinized. In my guess, I'm not really an expert on this, but in my guess, at least, colonial narrative includes the myth of the exotic East and logical West. That actually is apparent in the case of West Hall of ITB. I will explain later. The seemingly politically motivated selection of Hindu-Buddhist Javanese past as the classical period, but this has been well explained by Bu Anissa earlier. The seemingly Java-centric narrative and the denial of the natives' initiatives or agencies during the process of Indianization. Well, yesterday, Ibu Indah questioned what is Indianization. All this sounds unrelated to architecture, of course, but I will say, well, all this is actually a profound spectral factor that also shapes the way we see our architectural knowledge today. This may be a point that can be discussed at this roundtable. Well, when I said earlier, the myth of exotic East and logical West is expressed at the West Hall of ITB is very simple. Look at the roof that McLennan designed. That I don't want to talk about the design in detail, but that the roof represents the East, of course, the exotic East, whereas the wooden structural elements, the arch elements that support the roof, that actually represents the logical West here. I'm suggesting that McLennan actually said that, of course, that would be too much. But setting this architectural design against the backdrop of colonial policy or colonial, should I say, prejudice and all that, that's how we can read the West Hall of ITB. Okay, I will stay with this slide for now to say something else. While we talk about colonial policy as an important factor of whatever happened now, but I would say this as well, that the reason why I'm showing you this image, well, I don't want to talk about the Gresik-Semen plan as it is. I'm not saying that this is a very, very important factor either. However, this illustrates another influence that affects us today. at least in the architectural scene of Indonesia, American influence. The 1950s, the Cold War. Well, this is not a part of the Marshall Plan. This is another scheme by the U.S. To keep people away from communism. So Indonesia received a lot of economic aid and technical aid from the U.S. One of them was used by Indonesia to build a Gresik cement plant. This plant, by the way, would deliver Portland cement to every single architectural project Sukarno built. Just check the archive of the Secretariat of State, if you like. They mentioned that. So, notice that the plan was financed by U.S. sources. The plan was planned by an American firm, and it was built by another American firm. An American firm, namely Morrison Knudsen International, which, along with another firm called Bechtel International, had very important, significant role during the Cold War in the American scheme to, to keep people away from communism. Okay, next slide, please. This is my last slide. So what you see here is an excerpt of the 1958 architecture programs curriculum at IITB, devised with U.S. financial and technical assistance. Now, of course, we can talk about other aspects of it, but I'd like to focus on one thing here. History of Indonesian architecture in the 4th semester, and in the 5th semester, native Indonesian architecture. Well, this is interesting. On the one hand, this curriculum is the result of American financial and technical assistance. But on the other hand, it still reflects the colonial narrative of what we call as Indonesian architecture. Like history of Indonesian architecture seems to be separated from what they call as native Indonesian architecture. Perhaps today we will call it vernacular architecture. Not native Indonesian architecture, but vernacular architecture, as if vernacular architecture is outside the historiography of Indonesian architecture. Now, what is Indonesian architecture then, according to this curriculum? I have no idea. Perhaps it started with, I don't know, neoclassical buildings during the colonial era, and then, in the 1950s and all that. I don't know, or traditional architecture, or perhaps it includes traditional architecture, such as the architecture of Kraton, such as the architecture of the Candi Prambanan, Candi Borobudur, and all that. But native Indonesian architecture, well, that seems to be the what we call as vernacular architecture today. And it is interesting that the two concepts, the native Indonesian architecture is separated from history of Indonesian architecture. So that's the way we see ourselves, see our own architecture. And one may wonder, okay, this is American assisted curriculum, but was there Indonesian agencies in the creation of this curriculum? I would say, yeah, probably so. I think so, very likely so. But of course, we ourselves were shaped by our colonial past as well. So hence we have these two subjects in 2 different semesters. So, yep, I would like to close my presentation. Here, perhaps you can think of not only the Dutch colonial policy and its influence on ourselves and the way we see ourselves, whether we see our own architecture or our own art history or something, but there is also another additional influence that apparently has effect on us. Look, after all, the reason why I bring up ITB Architecture School's curriculum of 1958 is not because ITB hosts this forum, but because ITB is the origin of all architecture schools in Indonesia. So think about the influence of this curriculum. And yes, the creation of other architecture schools in Indonesia took place after the publication of this 1958 curriculum. Well, I thank you for having me here.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you, Pak Nanda. Yeah, I'm beyond happy that Pak Nanda opened his presentation with the problem of the binary ways of seeing. That also, yeah, I thought that it is also related to the policy and to the debate. That's the most important thing. That how the debate also has been excluded the local agents. Maybe that also, yeah, I hope that we can also come back to that later. But related to the agent is changed during the colonial policy and then moved to the Cold War situation that also shaped another kind of facet we have to acknowledge. Yeah. So before our third panelist, I will open maybe one very short, simple question. Is there anybody? Well, if there is no question for this moment, I will introduce you to our last panelist, Pak Dikdik. Sayahdikumullah. Ya, silakan Pak.
Halo. Good morning. Atau mungkin sudah siang ya. Good morning. Welcome to ITB and thank you for coming. But thank you for Kiki and Sifas to invite me as one of the panelists in this symposium. But this time, in my presentation, I will explain not in English, but in Indonesia. Baik, terima kasih. Saya ada pengalaman sebenarnya dalam undangan ini karena ada hubungannya dengan pengaruh kebijakan Belanda ke dalam membayangkan sebuah modernitas. Saya punya pengalaman tahun 2023 itu melakukan penelitian tentang perkuliahan anatomi yang dijalankan di Balai Pendidikan Universiter Guru Gambar di ITB tentunya sekarang ya. Studi kasus itu saya batasi di tahun 47 sampai 77 saja supaya lebih ya, karena penelitiannya hanya 1 tahun jadi saya batasi saja. Next. Timeline yang saya bicarakan adalah 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 tentang sedikit pengantar tentang Balai Pendidikan Universiter, kemudian ada pertanyaannya apa, lalu metodenya yang digunakan dan apa sebetulnya bagaimana metode pengajaran yang dilakukan di Balai Universiter Guru Gambar atau saya singkat nantinya BPUGG. Next. Ada satu hal bahwa universalisme ini menjadi begitu besar pengaruhnya ke dalam dunia pendidikan. Di antaranya menempatkan tubuh manusia ini sebagai satu subjek pengetahuan klasik yang pijakannya kepada rasionalitas, perseptual juga dan aspek psikomotor. Nah, di sini struktur tubuh manusia itu bagian dari fenomena alam yang dalam konteks ilmu anatomi itu dia dilihat sebagai suatu yang bekerja secara mekanistik. Ini pengetahuan dasar untuk memahami proporsi tubuh manusia, dan umumnya studi ini sebenarnya didasarkan pada satu pengamatan empiris. Nah, empiris ini apa yang diamati adalah dalam konteks ini yaitu justru artefak atau karya-karya seni yang pernah dibuat sebelumnya. Dan studi anatomi artistik di sini sebenarnya tidak terlalu dilihat sebagai sebuah bidang studi yang khusus ya, hanya sebuah mata kuliah tertentu saja, mata kuliah gambar. Padahal kalau kita melihat akademi seni Eropa itu sudah mengembangkan anatomi itu sudah berkembang cukup jauh bahkan sebelum abad pertengahan. Konsep yang kita pahami tentang anatomi itu sendiri itu yang sudah established ya kita disampai kepada Balai Pendidikan Universiter Guru Gambar adalah konsep-konsep yang sudah established dari abad 15 ke sini gitu ya. Di sekitar sampai tahun 1850 itu hampir nggak ada studi anatomi artistik. Jadi barulah di abad 19 studi anatomi artistik itu menjadi bagian dari sebuah akademi dan berkembangnya di Eropa. Kemudian ada dua tahap yang biasanya diajarkan pada akademi seni di Eropa itu, yaitu satu tahapan mimesis untuk yang lower class dan yang kedua yang higher class, itu tahap yang biasanya menggunakan live drawing. Next slide. Ada dua kategori praktik dalam gambar anatomi yang menjadi prasyarat keterampilan akademis. Yang awalnya yaitu dipush itu untuk kepada para pemula, pada mahasiswa yang mau belajar untuk menjadi kalau mau masuk ke dalam kompetisi salon, maka mereka harus belajar anatomi internal, kemudian anatomi eksternal, dan objek yang dipelajarinya ada dua macam, yaitu satu kerangka yang kemudian ada pembedahan ya, dissection, kemudian juga ada ecorse. Dan bagian yang eksternal inilah yang mempelajari patung gipsum atau plaster cast, kemudian patung-patung antik, patung dari berbagai macam peradaban dan kebudayaan, dan terakhirnya adalah live model. Di awal-awal di abad 20 inilah saya loncat aja ke abad 20 bahwa perkembangan pendidikan anatomi dari Eropa itu menyebar ke Amerika, dan di Amerika juga sama menekankan kepada disiplin untuk mendemonstrasikan bahwa betapa pentingnya kemampuan menguasai atau mengontrol satu proses artistik bagi seorang seniman pemula. Next. Ini kita masuk kepada apa yang kemudian terjadi di Balai Pendidikan Universiter Guru Gambar atau di ITB ini. Sekilas secara historis, Balai Pendidikan Universiter Guru Gambar itu dimulai dari gagasan sebuah percakapan antara Dr. Krekeng dengan Jacobus Marie Hofmann, seorang guru gambar Middelbar Onderwijs. Nah, dari sini pemerintah Hindia Belanda kemudian mendirikan lembaga ya, punya keinginan untuk mendirikan lembaga karena memang kekurangan guru pada saat itu, guru sekolah menengah kalau sekarang ya. Dan kedua, bahwa seorang guru itu harus memiliki sertifikat Middelbar Akte, dan itu hanya ada di Belanda. Sementara di Indonesia pada saat itu belum banyak. Ada 2 proposal kemudian yang diusulkan yang mungkin sudah sering kita dengar, terutama di mahasiswa seni rupa di sini. Usulan rancangan kurikulum sekolah dari Hopman, kemudian yang kedua dari Simon Admiral. Keduanya membuat rancangan yang kalau pelajari isinya itu ada kesamaannya, dan juga ada fokus perbedaannya ya. Pada Simon Admiral ini lebih menekankan pada satu rancangan yang ada ke arah sekolah seni yang berbeda dengan yang ada di Belanda. Next. Kalau usulan Simon Admiral ini lebih memberikan pembahasan yang lebih rinci mengenai klasifikasi seni rupa, yaitu ada mata kuliah menggambar, ada melukis, memahat, menggrafis, dan juga ada teori anatomi yang dibutuhkan bagi seorang mahasiswa, itu belajarnya teori anatomi 1 jam, lalu praktek sketsa anatomi kurang lebih 2 jam gitu ya. Nah, tentu bukan karena mata kuliah anatomi ini Kreikeng itu menyetujui dan usulan dari Simon Admiral. Yang jelas pemerintah menyetujui konsep dari Admiral, kemudian dibuatlah satu kampus yang namanya dan diangkat saudara Admir Simon ini menjadi Direktur Akademis Institut Leergang voor Opleiding van Tekenlelaren. Kemudian nama akademi ini berubah menjadi Universitair Leergang yang disesuaikan namanya untuk pendidikan khusus bagi guru gambar. Seorang guru seni ini tentu harus memiliki orientasi internasional sebagai duta budaya untuk tidak hanya menikmati seni, tapi juga bagaimana membimbing mahasiswa untuk bisa mewujudkan ekspresi kualitas artistik yang tumbuh dari pribadi masing-masing. Ini mungkin beberapa kunci dari istilah guru gambar yang ada di dalam konsep-konsep proposal kedua orang itu. Tapi bagaimana mata pelajaran anatomi ini diajarkan di BPUGG? Next. Sebagaimana pengaruh kebijakan kolonial Belanda tidak hanya berdampak pada tadi arsitektur ya, pada dunia seni rupa dan pendidikan seni juga ada, dan itu kebijakan politik etis ini mengikat terhadap persoalan kurikulum. Salah satunya bagaimana mereka mentransisikan model sekolah Eropa ke dalam sekolah-sekolah yang memiliki akar pendiriannya di Hindia Belanda. Tentu ada perdebatan, ada yang pesimis, ada yang optimis. Pesimis karena masalah soal terancamnya keragaman budaya yang ada di dalam masyarakat Hindia Belanda. Kemudian juga sebagian menganggap bahwa pendirian sekolah yang memiliki kurikulum Eropa itu bisa menjadi channel transisi untuk melihat dan memahami kebudayaan dunia gitu ya, yang lebih luas. Next. Ada hal yang menarik bahwa sesudah pendirian BPUGG ini, bahwa kesempatan dan perubahan yang terjadi itu tidak terbendung. Apalagi sesudah era Indonesia merdeka, dan masyarakat juga sudah memahami bahwa pendidikan adalah media yang paling efektif untuk mengubah masyarakat pribumi, ini ada hal yang menarik ketika Ki Hajar Dewantara juga mengadopsi konsep Rudolf Steiner tentang model pendidikan yang menekankan kepada aktivitas dan praktek seni melalui seni gambar, seni lukis, gambar, kerajinan tangan, wayang, aritmik, dan drama. Maka seiring evolusi kebijakan dan kurikulum tentunya ya dalam pendidikan nasional, itu di tahun 60 muncul satu pembaharuan pendidikan yang disebut Pancawardhana, di mana kegiatan seni dalam pendidikan itu dianggap sebagai implementasi nilai budaya yang mencerminkan semangat kebangsaan. Nah, dari sinilah ide-ide pikiran tentang bagaimana mengubah konsep-konsep kebijakan yang berasal dari era kolonial diubah menjadi, kalau sekarang itu dinasionalisasi gitu ya, sehingga terjadi perubahan tidak hanya pada level kebijakan tapi juga pada level praktiknya nanti. Salah satu contoh konsep pendidikan seni ini menekankan pada pentingnya fundamental yang fundamental education yang berlandaskan pada kepribadian dan semangat alih budaya itu sendiri. Tahun 60 itu posisinya dosen-dosen Belanda, dosen-dosen yang mendirikan BPUGG tahun 1947 itu sudah ada di dalam posisi harus memilih antara meninggalkan Indonesia atau tetap di Indonesia sebagai artinya ya tetap untuk apakah nanti mengajar lagi di ITB atau menerima posisi di BPUGG itu, saya kira. Next slide. Saya kira ada hal yang dari itu baru latar belakang, dan saya mencoba menyusun asumsi penelitian tentang teori anatomi itu dijalankan di BPUGG. Bagaimana BPUGG ini mengadaptasi dan mengimplementasikan teori, model maupun analisis anatomi itu ke dalam praktik artistik, dan juga bagaimana akar penerapan metode pengajaran menggambar ini apakah masih relevan sampai sekarang. Selama penelitian saya melihat dan menggali sejumlah arsip dan data-data serta dokumen korespondensi yang masih tersimpan di kampus ITB, walaupun ya mungkin belum semua sebetulnya, masih ada banyak yang masih tersembunyi. Kemudian juga kami pernah datang kepada satu sumber referensi di Belanda, yaitu perpustakaan di Belanda, untuk menggali lebih banyak tentang data-data yang berkaitan dengan satu metode anatomi yang diajarkan di ITB. Next slide. Next. Kurang besar ya. Okay. Nah ya, oke. Nah, poin pertama yang digali adalah kurikulum. Gambar anatomi itu mulainya sejak kapan? Walaupun dalam konsep BPUGG, konsep beragam mata kuliah, termasuk mata kuliah gambar garis, gambar ornamen, perspektif, stereometri, planimetri, sketsa, teknik reproduksi model patung dan relief 3 dimensi juga diajarkan. Nah, kalau kita lihat di awal itu tidak dicantumkan tentang mata kuliah anatomi gambar anatomi. Tetapi baru sekitar tahun 1948 ya, 1948 ada mata kuliah anatomi yang dicantumkan di dalam kurikulum BPUGG. Di sini dosennya adalah Franz, tapi menurut informasi dari seorang narasumber itu nama depannya Hans. Cuma sampai sekarang kita gali-gali tokoh ini masih belum ketemu yang seperti apa sebenarnya. Jadi masih ada yang misterius. Oh, 3 menit lagi. Aduh, masih panjang. Oke. Oke, yang jelas ini mata kuliahnya ada kurang lebih seperti ini. Masih menggunakan nama anatomi Stekenen. Kemudian di era berikutnya berubah menjadi mata kuliah kode seni rupa. Next slide. Next slide ya. Oh, stop yang tadi. Kuliah anatomi yang tidak banyak diketahui adalah mereka menggunakan model apa itu ya. Salah satu yang kami dapatkan adalah model anatomi itu tidak hanya menggunakan live model tetapi juga menggunakan molas dan salah satu yang kami temukan itu adalah molas. Molas itu seperti contoh di sebelah kanan ini model tubuh manusia yang menampilkan otot bentuknya 3 dimensi dan hampir mirip otot manusia, mendekat ya, mirip banget itu ya. Tetapi otot yang itu maksudnya berbeda dengan model ekorse, di mana model ekorse itu otot yang memiliki warna persis seperti otot aslinya gitu. Sehingga model kuliah anatomi yang datang ke BPUGG sejauh yang kami temukan itu masih menggunakan model molas, kemudian juga patung-patung kuno yang berasal dari koleksi patung-patung mungkin dari dalam kisahnya Van Romon itu dituliskan, dan kerangka. Next slide. Metode pengajaran anatomi terdiri dari memiliki struktur yang 3 bagian. Tahun pertama mereka harus belajar sendi, otot, ligamen manusia. Tahun keduanya perbandingan anatomi tingkat lanjut. Tahun ketiganya mereka belajar proporsi hewan vertebrata. Model pembelajaran ini menggunakan anatomi 2 dimensi. Anatomi 2 dimensi itu maksudnya adalah diagram gambar 2 dimensi. Diagram gambar 2 dimensi, misalnya gambar reproduksi gambar tengkorak, reproduksi gambar kerangka dan lain sebagainya. Yang 3 dimensi ini yang kami temukan adalah sebagaimana picture yang ada di samping, itu ada replika, ada kerangka tulang, kemudian beberapa molas yang hingga saat ini masih tersimpan di area kampus seni rupa. Mungkin pada zamannya itu, pada awalnya diimpor ke Indonesia lebih banyak. Dan yang terakhir adalah patung-patung candi Hindu Jawa Borobudur dan Prambanan menurut catatan Helena Spanjar. Next. Penjelasan mengenai mata kuliah anatomi di BPUGG bisa kita lihat di sini. Sejak tahun 48 mereka masih menggunakan nama anatominya sampai 49, 50. Nah, ada tambahan semester ketiga menggunakan anatomi Stekenen. Kemudian tahun 50-51 ada tambahan mata kuliah model Tekenen. Kemudian tahun 52-53 ada semester 1 semakin bertambah jumlahnya, konten, bobot materi yang diberikan semakin bertambah, sampai kemudian tahun 53-54 sudah mulai menggunakan bahasa Indonesia, menggambar anatomi 24 gitu ya. Kemudian di tahun 54-55 itu hampir sama, tapi teksnya tidak lagi menggunakan anatomia tapi langsung anatomi, berarti sudah diterjemahkan semuanya ke dalam bahasa Indonesia. Next. Ini contoh bagaimana mahasiswa BPUGG menggambar objek anatomis itu tidak hanya molas dan kerangka, tetapi juga bentuk patung yang kuno, patung kuno gitu ya. Next slide. Beberapa komentar catatan dari eksponen BPUGG, misalnya Pak Soemardja mengatakan apa urgensinya untuk memberikan mata kuliah gambar anatomi adalah tidak hanya memperdalam bentuk, tetapi juga menciptakan garis-garis yang berintipati. Sebuah garis berarti mungkin dalam bayangan saya adalah esensi, sebuah garis yang esensial gitu ya. Kemudian Sujoko juga mengatakan bahwa hampir tidak ada kesempatan jika belajar anatomi, maka tidak ada kesempatan menggambar bebas selain menghasilkan wimba, itu badan, kepala, tangan, objek seakurat mungkin. Oke, saya kira ini next, sebenarnya slide-nya masih cukup panjang, tapi yang jelas bahwa mata kuliah anatomi itu terjadi ada suatu pemisahan di mana kuliah gambar anatomi ini pernah tidak diperboleh, hanya dikhususkan pada mahasiswa yang belajar seni lukis. Tetapi ada sebagian mahasiswa yang belajar pendidikan seni itu tidak disarankan, tidak diperbolehkan untuk mengambil mata kuliah anatomi. Next. Ya, ini ada sebentar. Baik lagi, ada satu satu. Nah, salah satu hal yang menarik ya, kami adalah ini nih. Agak next. Ya, ini dalam praktek gambar anatomi seringkali dilakukan dan mungkin disadari atau mungkin juga tidak ya oleh pengajarnya, mungkin juga oleh mahasiswanya. Padahal kalau kita lihat konsep menggambar motif anatomi, misalnya tengkorak kepala, itu orientasi anatomi kepala itu biasanya cenderung tidak diarsir. Tetapi kalau kita lihat garis kesejajaran garis merah itu ya, ada garis orbital horizon yang sejajar antara lubang telinga itu dengan lubang hidung, itu dianggap sebagai satu prinsip teknik ya di dalam gambar anatomi untuk mempermudah pelajaran. Tetapi kalau kita balik ke dalam konsep dasar anatomi, itu adalah sudah ada dalam diagram anatomi sudut wajah Petrus Kemper yang mengukur standar anatomi khusus orang kulit putih. Sehingga standar itu konsep ini tidak banyak dielaborasi oleh para mahasiswanya gitu ya. Next slide. Next slide ini ya. Next. Oke, yang ini terusan dari kurikulum bagan yang ke-1. Di sini disebut bahwa tahun 56 sampai 57 itu terjadi perombakan terminologi anatomi, kemudian ada pemisahan teori anatomi dan gambar anatomi tahun 69 sampai 71 dan tetapi masih mempertahankan nama mata kuliah 3 mata kuliah gambar model dan 1 mata kuliah anatomi, dan akhirnya semua itu sampai tahun 77 itu digabung menjadi nama mata kuliah menggambar saja. Sehingga orientasi praktik ini boleh dikatakan kalau anatomi itu selalu dihubungkan dengan konsep anatomi medis, tapi di BPUGG itu diarahkan kepada satu pendidikan tentang anatomi artistik. Next slide. Nah, arah anatomi artistik ini pada akhirnya mereka mengembangkan satu pengajaran anatomi yang lebih mempertahankan atau lebih menggali kepekaan estetikanya ya, estetika baik itu interioritas maupun eksterioritas tubuh manusia. Tantangan yang dihadapi adalah tentunya apakah dari evolusi itu ya, evolusi pengajaran kurikulum anatomi itu apakah melahirkan adanya disiplin khusus tentang anatomi artistik. Nah, sejauh kami teliti tidak ada gitu ya. Jadi tidak berhasil, tidak menjadikan satu bidang atau minat studi khusus gitu ya. Padahal sudah sejak tahun 47 materi ini diajarkan, kemudian juga ada satu saatnya tahun 74 itu turun lagi, dihilangkan, kemudian dimunculkan lagi, dan sampai sekarang materi kuliah yang berkaitan dengan anatomi itu masih dipraktekkan sampai sekarang, tentunya dengan orientasi lebih pada pencarian yang bersifat artistik. Oke, next kurang lebih bisa disimpulkan seperti itu.
Baik, terima kasih Pak Dikdik. Yeah, I think that also it's related to the problem of the binary ways of seeing again, because yeah, from the universalism and mechanistic manner of teaching to what they call as local traditions, kepekaan and everything in, for example, in BPUGG's curriculum, that was heavily influenced by ethical policy at the time. So I will invite Aulia Yeru. Yeah, Aul, you already there? Yeah. Okay. Aul, could you put something on that? Maybe some sort of elaboration from the three panelists here?
Yeah, very interesting roundtables indeed. It begins with Anissa presentations that highlighted how Hindu Buddhism is more prevalent in portraying Southeast Asia cultures. With its collections displayed in several major museums in Europe and the US, and how it contrasts with Islam that emerged as one of the major religions in the area that rarely represented, and how this inclination can be traced back into how colonial perspective imagined the area, and how the colonials strive to search a more authentic culture, which reflects the colonial anxiety against Islam itself. And also there's some stresses that at the colonial times, there's a competition between imperials, namely Dutch and British. And move to Nanda presentation, which try to convey the debate of architecture in Indonesia, which still continue today, but it can be traced from the establishment of West Hall of ITB, and how there's some kind of binaries there, Western versus Eastern, and local architecture is neglected as a vernacular architecture, in which the architecture of the Indies was often the architecture of the Chandi or the temples often referred to as the classical, which is again, as Anissa already conveyed, is show the inclination to Hindu, Buddha, and Javanese centric cultures, and finally the Dikdik presentation also starts from this bold statement, I think, that universalism become the basis foundation of the teachings in the Balai Pendidikan Guru Gambar, and how the anatomy lesson primarily relies on empirical observations, and the archa were also used in the in the in the teachings. And I think that's all. What I can summarize from these presentations. I think there's also there's some similarity between all of these presenters. How Indonesia is imagined and how we imagine Indonesia could be traced back into how colonial imagined the area, and how there's some kind of inclination that there's a more primary cultures, and then there's some kind of the secondary class cultures there, which reflects as probably in Anissa presentation is more that Islam is quite left behind in how Netherlands in this portrait, and probably also how vernacular architecture also placed in under some kind of classical architecture, and also how archa become a merely tool as in the anatomy drawings teachings. And I think that's my my summary and my point of interest of those presentations. Take it away, Kiki, to questions, Q&A sessions.
Okay, I take it back. And I will do you want to also emphasize and related to our question, our research question? Do you have also maybe something to ask to the panelists? Yeah.
I think for probably related to Pak Dikdik and Pak Nanda, as I'm intrigued to think that how there's a gap between the discourse in architecture and fine art educations, but also it shows some parallels. I think in thinking of how modernity, there's a binary between modernity and traditional and so forth, and how especially regarding that FSRD also actually one of the department that become one faculty under the faculty Teknik Sipil. I think is there any relation or any possible relationship between all of those lectures? I mean, if we refer to the art history, it's rarely regarded that we had some parallels with another cultures or debates on another disciplines. It's like we have some kind of specialized rooms.
Freeze. Oh, okay. Yeah, maybe the internet connection. So I will, yeah. Maybe we can elaborate that response and question from Aulia. Maybe we can go to Pak Nanda first, and then followed by Icha and Pak Dikdik maybe. Yeah.
Okay. I'll try to respond based on what I could hear before Mas Al freeze. Sorry, Mas. Tadi nge-freeze.
Iya nge-freeze tadi.
Well, I think one of the reason if not the main reason for the discrepancy that is present in Indonesia when it comes to architecture and fine arts, is because of the fact that in 1920, when the architecture program was opened in TH Bandung, it was operated under the civil engineering program. Now, therefore, even up to now, there are still quite many people in the field of architecture in Indonesia who think that architecture is derived from civil engineering. So we have many cases, including in my own institution, that architecture program is operated under the Faculty of Engineering, Fakultas Teknik. Now, actually, in my view, it doesn't really matter as long as we understand that the Indonesian word technik, was actually derived. I'll just jump to the past, long past. Derived from the Greek word techne. Now, if we understand what techne means, then actually it doesn't matter. And techne also has to do with the arts, of course, right? In fine art, it matters as well. But this is not well understood in Indonesia, particularly in the engineering field, thinking that, well, it's engineering, it has nothing to do with the art. Well, that's the reason why we have that discrepancy. Although I myself would say that actually architecture is derived from the fine arts. That's one thing. And second, the reason why the universal versus the specific still matters, as far as I know, it also has, well, it's not something that is isolated in Indonesia, of course. But in our context, in the Indonesian context, probably it has to do with the fact that, particularly during the late colonial era, I have to isolate that, that particular period, 1903 to 1942. There was this understanding that the universal refers to something rational, logical, and all that, whereas the specific, the local, that is, has to do with something that is not rational, something, exotic or something like that. Or there is, of course, Orientalistic way of seeing things there. And this still, that affected the way we Indonesians see things as well. For one example, during Sukarno period, during Sukarno presidency, one of the cabinet minister was Dr. Priyono, who was the Minister of Education and Culture, I think, if I'm not mistaken, something like that. And he was commenting on Hotel Indonesia and Gelora Bung Karno and all that in early 1960s, and he brought up Sigmund Freud somehow in his comments. So, but the point is that it is the universal that becomes important. It is the universal, the rational side, what they considered as rational, that is that has to be that has to dominate in the way we see our architecture. That's what happened in architecture, and this is the reason why today, up to today, in Indonesia, we still have this debate whether we should support, let's say so, support contemporary architecture as whatever happens throughout globally, or we should support what we call as local architecture or whatever it is, for whatever arguments each side has. Although it is no longer about rational or irrational or something like that. It's about appropriateness with condition and all that. I'm sorry, perhaps it doesn't really answer your question, Mas Al, because you freeze, so I didn't listen. I couldn't listen to every single question that you asked. But if you need something to clarify, just let me know. I'll try to clarify.
Sorry, Pananda. Let's so
No
we can
worries.
move to Icha and Pak Dikdik.
Thank you, Al, for the question. I think what is interesting to note as well is from the presentations from Pananda and from Dikdik, is the focus of the curriculum in Bandung. Of course, as a of art as a technical skill, and therefore we don't have. I think there was a question like yesterday about why there is no art history, or how come that we're such a large country and then there is no art history, right? And I think part of the reason is because of how the curriculum was set up at the time as a as a technical studies, how to be, as Dikdik mentioned, how to be a second letter, right? How to be a how to be a drawing teacher. So all the all the sort of subjects around the technical drawings, around the anatomy drawings, were there to sort of like support your sort of like pursuit of technical masteries. So I think in this, I think the curriculum from like the 40s, I think we have, on top of the technical skills of illustrations and drawings and paintings, we have art appreciation, which was found, right? And then we also have history of culture. And I think at least when we were still in undergraduate, which is in 2000, 2000-ish, right? I think we still have those. Sort of subjects of history of culture, sejarah kebudayaan, and we also still, I think we had art appreciation, if I'm not mistaken, and they might still be there as well. But then we have also art history, but more of as a course, as a modules, rather than sort of a whole discipline. So we had introductory courses. I'm sorry, back in the 40s again, we had introductory courses in modern, and quote unquote, I mean bracket Western, and then we have also history of Islamic art, and it's focusing mostly on Islamic heartland, which means that the Middle East, the Arabian Peninsula, Persia. So not so much on Indonesia. So this is back in the 40s, and in the 80s we began to sort of see the production knowledge of Islamic art in Indonesia by Pak Sadali, Pak Wilso. But I think the way we categorize that knowledge is still sort of like conforming to how um, sort of the knowledge of Islamic art was formed in the West, right? So there's still hierarchies of like objects, of forms, and so um, and then we also had, back in the 40s, we had Asian or Eastern art history, which is focusing mostly on Chinese and the Indian art history. So I think as we can see here, and we still see sort of like the continuities of some of these subjects, and continuities of how we sort of segregate the modern, and let's say between the modern and the pre-modern. So the Hindu Buddhist, the Islamic fell under the pre-modern, right? And that, I think, is sort of like resonates with Pananda said about the differentiations between the logical and then the non-logical. So the modern, which is the logical, that falls under the different categories, right? And we still see it we still saw it when we were in undergrads, of Seni Rupa Lama and Seni Rupa Baru distinction, although there was already sort of like an effort to not sort of give it in to the hegemony of how we understand the modern. So there was already an effort in translations, at least by Pak Sanento at the time. Yeah.
we can move to Pak Dikdik. Hello there.
Yeah, hello. Thank you for your question and response. Maybe I want to answer from my perspective of this paper about the fine art education and issue of modernity and tradition on the for specific for running on local educators. So I see in this BPUGG the local educators also still considering about the human proportion concept. The human proportion concept is still elaborate, not only to elaborate to be a new kind of discipline. For example, they after this course of the BPUGG and national identity problem, and then the educators, para dosen-dosen develop new department, for example, design department, which teaching about still teaching about the human proportion, especially in interior design or product design or something else until now. But another the elaboration concept of the human proportion is to also influence to the educators also as artists, such as Ahmad Sadali. For example, Ahmad Sadali, we know his work is very abstract and spirituality or something. But if we consider about the human proportion concept is kind of the schematic thinking of the proportion itself. So Sadali and also Riswarie, just two kind of artists with different style and different experience. But from my view, the thinking of the schematic thinking is kind of method to be more easy to abstraction of reality. So this is a legacy from the anatomic concept that's origin since before Middle Ages. So when we see the contemporary situation of two artists, Sadali and Haryadi. For example, Haryadi, it's famous artist who it's kind of combining the modern and traditions. But what I see from this example execution of both two artists, they practicing to using the schematic thinking of the human proportion. One is to Sadali, it's more rational explanation, but Riswarie, it's schematic thinking of proportion, more flashback to before of modern era. So I think that similarity how the local lecture Indonesian educator respond about the modernity issue in this case.
Okay, thank you. Because we talk about the agents, I also want to invite one of our chairs today. Pai, can you also put something on that very very briefly, because our sini aja lah.
Thank you, Bu Kiki. So thank you so much, Icha, Pananda, dan Aul. I think it's an opinion, maybe just a discussion if we still have time. So the idea of making a modern subject through pedagogy and curriculum-wise is coming to, in my reading of your presentation, come through 3 words that can be a concept. The first one is train, in verb. So you train yourself to draw, you train yourself to see the buildings, you train yourself to see the painting from in this era. The second one is through technique. You imitate the models, you imitate the landscape, you imitate the things like that. And the third one, it can be a discipline. So you disciplinize yourself to think as the colonial, you discipline yourself to think as the modern subject. You get familiar with the way that pedagogically train yourself to be that kind of models. So I would like to know if there's a sense of that we are able to break ourselves from that discourse, in a sense that one of the things I like from each presentation is how can we make authentic in this through the presentation of the paintings or the sculpture that preserved and collected by museum in Netherlands, in New York and other places. And from Pananda is how the training to make in this society through the landscape, regional planning and things like that. And from Pak Dikdik is making the human perspective through anatomical drawing and things like that. If there's a chance of, if there's a way to break through that kind of dialogues, is it possible? Because in my sense that what makes us can talk to our friends, our adversaries, and things like that. This makes us now, things like that. Hope that makes sense.
Okay, good question. In my opinion about how to break the strapping of the Western modernity perspective, try to, it's possible and need more high effort, because people in new generation live in different stage, but our critical thinking is it's more have energy to to diving, trying more diving, but the keyword is trying to back to before of modern trapping era. So that's kind, but using the schematic thinking, not using the similar method such as have been done by the Western period. Because I know the Western civilization always trying to flashback, always trying to find the new originality by looking back to the before their era, their life era. So in this time Indonesia, maybe it from Indonesian perspective, has lucky position because every period always similar in front of eyes. So that's, but the problem, it's something difficult to selecting this is real, this is now present, or the old from the past. So the lack of our critical thinking maybe difficult to identify the old, the real old position. Yeah, I think we need to identify the, for example, Hindus, Buddha statue put as a model of studies, but it's just perceptual experience, just doing, just continuing to as matter of exercise, perceptual experience, expression, but never trying to identify the real concept of that statue. So that's why we still have many gaps with the past order. Thank you.
Yeah, some quick and very brief response to another panelist, please.
Maybe I can respond a little bit. I think from my point of view, I'm not really a believer of the concept of authenticity, especially in the context of cultural refugees. And I think the sort of notion of authenticity, purity, and so forth, they sort of like emerge from a very colonial modernist thinking at the time. And I think it's sort of like ties together with colonial anxiety, because their quest to search for purity cultural in the French East Indies, for example, or in Cambodia, or in other parts of the colonized world. I think it also sort of stems from the idea that the present that they were at the time, let's say 19th century, early 20th century, where they brought in, sort of like a different, where there were already sort of emergence of new industrialized society, which in the context of the colonial, we know that there was sort of emergence of like massive plantations and forced labor, and so that is like the present conflict. So then part of this colonial logic is to justify the colonial, and therefore to justify it is also to position themselves as the guardian, the guardian of the pure culture. So therefore the guardian of the Hindu Buddhist culture, Javanese culture, before the coming of Islam, because Islam is seen or perceived as the perceived as the adversary, right? Political adversary. And also there is, they can't see Islam in Java, for example, as authentic, quote unquote, pure Islam, because they also understood Islam very differently than what was being practiced or what had been practiced in Java. So I think, we sort of like have to be also critical of what is authentic, which I don't think there isn't, especially in Southeast Asia or in any other parts of the world, because then we negate cultural amalgamation, we negate sort of like encounters, we negate how we connect to each other and how we connect to different parts. And the question of whether we can sort of get away from, from thinking with this logic, with this colonial logic. I mean, there's already been a lot of scholarship on that, right? About decolonizing our history, and what a lot of museums have been trying to do, how to then present knowledge with consideration of the colonial history. because that's also what forms our discourse today, and that discourse is important, right? But then how do we sort of also like move away from that? And I think there are different ways. Going back to sort of indigenous knowledge system, that's part of it. Going back to the making, to the practice, art making practice, that is still contemporarily being done. So this indigenous, let's say, knowledge system also is not located in the past, it's located in the present. And for a lot of them, the colonial sort of thinkers, it also, it also sort of like helps with thinking about the future. And especially when thinking about the future in times of climate crisis, right? So thinking about indigenous knowledge as something contemporaneous, as something that we do, but has been neglected by colonial sort of thinking. There are many other ways, and I think in terms of curriculum, I think, even to have this workshop and symposium is also a way to, sort of like practice it, but also to find a way how to develop our curriculum in the future, especially in Balai.
I'll try to make it quick. Well, the problem of the notion of authenticity has been explained by Ibu Anissa, and I may add something else. Even before the use of the notion for colonialism purposes, not only in Indonesia but anywhere else, the notion of authenticity was already problematic. The root came from Romanticism and historicism in Europe itself, and that's where the notion of authenticity came up, and it never talked about the real thing, if I can put it that way. It talked about the imagined thing. So what is authentic was imagined, and it was political, always political. So it wasn't something neutral. It wasn't something real. What is authentic anyway? What is authentic, for instance, Nusantara, for instance? Who knows, right? That is when before the use of the notion for colonial purposes. But I agree with both Pak Dikdik and Bu Anissa that there is a way to break away from this colonial, how to put it, tradition. Look, for the last 3 or 4 decades, sorry, I don't remember, there have been attempts to decolonize knowledge. There have been attempts to decolonize education and whatever. There has been this awareness that there's a problem with the way we see things, the way we see ourselves, etc., and so forth. Authenticity is one of the things that we need to question. In architecture, for instance, I find the notion of authenticity has been a sticking problem. Has been, we haven't able to see ourselves architecturally in Indonesia, at least. And I'm sure not only in Indonesia because of this question of authenticity. Perhaps this is also the reason why in the 1950s and 60s, although I'm not saying that whatever Karno did was right, there was a problem that they had. But there was a reason why in the 1950s and 60s, what was considered as the appropriate architecture for Indonesia was actually a modernist architecture. Well, because it seems that Sukarno, well, not just him, perhaps some other people as well, realized that, look, there was nothing authentic anyway. The Republic of Indonesia, as the founders of the Republic already conceived, was based on the former territory of the Netherlands is in this. They knew it, and they were aware of it, and they were aware of the fact that there must be consequences for such decision, including on cultural sectors. That, whatever we are, we may have been the result of Van Hert's policy after he became Governor General, who knows? Even the notion of NKRI, Negara Kesatuan Republik Indonesia, may have been something that Van Hertz came up in 1903, although of course he didn't use the term NKRI. So let alone our arts and architecture. So, but I think we can stick to the idea of trying to decolonize our knowledge. I know it's easy to say, not easy to do, but let's try. That's all for me, because trying to make it short.
Thank you, Cak. Thank you, Pak Nanda. Pak Dikdik. Oh, tutup aja. Oh, okay. Oh, so I have double role again now. So thank you so much, Bu Kiki, Pak Dikdik, and Ica, Pak Nanda, and Aul in Zoom. It's a very pleasant discussion. There's a lot of things that we need to follow up, and we hope that we can see you in person soon, and we hope that Aul Lia get well soon. And thank you so much for you all. Thank you so much for people who are coming here and join our discussion. We will return at 1 p.m. With the last session of the day, and also the last session of this event with contemporary issues in conservation in Indonesia. So thank you so much, and see you later.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Recording stopped.